Hello, good afternoon, and thank you so much for waiting. I've been looking forward to this, and yeah, I think it's going to be worth the wait, so I'll let Chris get straight into it.
Now there's all this pressure, as if there wasn't pressure before.
Anyway, here you go. Please give a big round of applause to Chris Avellone. Thank you very much.
So first off, thank you guys for being so patient. I swear to God, we got here at not like 11 a.m. in the morning, tested out the presentation, plugged in 2 cables, everything was perfect, and then my technological kiss of death took over. And over the process, the entire Rezzed show messed up the presentation. So anyway, you guys are here for Project Eternity. I thought I'd run through some of the design pipelines we've been using and the development process for it, and I'm gonna do this a little faster than was intended because I misread the instructions for like, oh, you have a 35 to 40 minute presentation with room for questions at the end, when in fact it was a 20-minute presentation with room for questions at the end. So, any event, Project Eternity. Introductions are out of the way, you know who I am. I graduated college, it's fantastic. I went to California, oh my God. I love designing computer games. You guys not know that? Fantastic, you do now. I'm gonna leave room for questions. I want you guys to get to beers as quickly as possible. I've worked on a shitload of RPGs. God damn it, fucking awesome. DLC content, South Park, Stick of Truth. And I know this is gonna come as a huge shock to you guys, but I also worked on some frickin' Kickstarters too, amazing. So In Exile's Wasteland 2, which I'm finished up on, now I'm full-time on Eternity, except when I have some breathing room, in which case I also work on the new Torment game as well. So, all through the power of Kickstarter. I love Kickstarter. That was a panel earlier today, I won't go into that again. All of it makes me happy, and if you backed any of these projects, thank you very much. Let me just start by saying that. We really appreciate your support. It was a huge morale boost to our studio, and I, for one, am glad to see old school RPG games coming back and on the PC, so suck it, consoles. So I am not a CEO, biz guy, not have a big corporation, a creative guy, I roll the dice, I work with more people more talented than myself. Sometimes I moonlight as a stretch goal for various projects, but I don't give a shit because it lets me do what I love, which is design hardcore role-playing games with lots of branching reactivity and storylines. And my mom has no idea what I do. I can't possibly explain it to her, so I don't even try anymore. But you are here for Eternity. So what is Eternity? I'm actually not going to answer this question. I'm merely going to ask you guys, who does not know what Project Eternity is? Oh my God. Oh, okay, 5 people. I don't even want 5 people to suffer, but I'm gonna go really quick through this. I'm glad you 5 people asked. So once upon a time, there was a glorious studio called Black Isle Studios in the middle of Interplay. Did a lot of isometric role-playing games called Infinity Engine games based on BioWare's Infinity Engine. They were fantastic. I loved working on them. I spent the best years of my life working on them. Not that these years aren't great too, but way back in the past, I really enjoyed working on Icewind Dale, Torment. BioWare did a fantastic job with Baldur's Gate. They took you to a lot of exotic locations in these games, very painterly landscapes. It was really beautiful to travel through. Baldur's Gate had some kick-ass dungeons, great quests, good companions, and most of all, they were really the kind of RPGs that I really enjoy making. So we're like, hey, if we have a chance to launch an RPG project on Kickstarter, what sort of RPG should we create? We're like, well, we really enjoyed working on the Infinity Engine games. We really like the dungeons and tactical like dungeon exploration. The actual dungeon aesthetics, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, of Icewind Dale, and also sort of the party-based dungeon exploration mechanics that were also present in that game. Icewind Dale took you to some of the craziest locations in the Forgotten Realms, even though it was centered in the icy, frozen north of the Forgotten Realms. We also wanted to make sure we included a lot of the depth and reactivity that was in the Planescape Torment game, which, I spent a lot of years of my life and suffered much health problems over it, but it was all worthwhile. And we also wanted to make sure that we took a lot of things like people enjoyed about Baldur's Gate in terms of the epic quests, the memorable companions that people got attached to, and the sheer epic broad scope of the game. These games took you to a lot of beautiful places in the world map. Again, Icewind Dale had some crazy locations like frozen museums you could go to. Brilliant. Also featured pause and play combat, gave your companions directions, send them off in all corners, and if things get a little bit too hairy, you hit the space bar take a breather, go get some coffee, maybe order some pizza, come back, let all those commands play out until you need to hit the space bar again and pause combat. So Eternity. We have not been able to pitch a game like this before. And one thing I did want to say is sometimes I get asked the question that, hey, did you guys have this whole concept for the world of Eternity all good to go even before you even thought about putting it on Kickstarter? Did you guys actually pitch it to a publisher? And we did not. Eternity was made solely for the Kickstarter because we realized we had a lot more, we didn't have as many parameters as we would normally have pitching to a publisher, and to be honest, we didn't feel that that publishing pitch would go over it all well. It had all the bad adjectives associated with it, like it's kind of old school, like, Windows only, PC only. Those are not things that publishers typically want to hear when they're pumping a lot of money into a game to get a larger return, even if it's the kind of game that we really want to make, and hopefully a game that you guys really, really want to play. So Eternity has a lot of the elements of those old Infinity Engine games. We've got a beautiful world for the player to explore. It's very rich in culture and history. We've tried to include a basic range of classes that people are familiar with, like dwarves and elves, for example. And even though I detest elves, like with a fucking passion, Eternity allows for a lot more cultural variations and twists with these character races that make them more appealing and put a new twist on them, which I really appreciate. So if you do see a dwarf running around with a sort of Eskimo vibe about them, wielding a bow and arrow and doing critical shots to the head, that's the kind of character that you can build in Eternity if you want to create a character like that, and I am more than fine with that. And if you want to get a little crazy with your character races, or if you're a cat person like I am, I know what character race I'm going to choose in Eternity, and that it allows for that with the world that we're creating on our own. You gather these companions, you form a party, explore dungeons, meet a whole host of nasty, spectral soul creatures. Some are a little bit more flesh and blood. Either way, you can kick the living shit out of them, take their gold, figure out the larger agenda that's going on, and enjoy your role-playing game experience. Also, we have a lot of cool dungeons to explore in the game. It was very much a part of Baldur's Gate. It was very much a part of Icewind Dale. Probably not so much a part of Planescape Torment, but we wanted to make sure that we're including the whole Infinity Engine experience in Eternity. So we have this backer-level dungeon called the Endless Paths, which, to our sadness, ended up living up to its name, because the more backers that we got for the project, the dungeon kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, until 15 levels were hit, and we do appreciate the support, but it is going to be one crazy fun dungeon for us to design. So thank you all for the support for that. And one of my favorite parts about this was at some point our art director, Rob Nessler, was like, you know what? I'm going to start including hints of even crazier stuff at the bottom of this dungeon. So we started watching this human head start appearing through the bottom levels of the dungeon. I'm like, I just was hoping that we get more backers so I can see how this whole thing pans out. So, yeah, but it was a lot of fun to design, and we're really looking forward to doing the development for that dungeon. Also, we wanted to include a lot of the beautiful locations that were in the Infinity Engine games. A lot of our recent screenshots of our prototypes for Eternity have showcased the... Ta-ta. My God. Sorry, it's Adele machines have suddenly jumped out of nowhere with 20 hit dice, and now I'm at some of my party to defeat it. And it's brought to you by the power of Unity, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. We were going to use our internal engine, Onyx, but one thing that we discovered about having sort of downscoped finances through the Kickstarter project is when we use our own internal engine, it has so much middleware associated with it that it's almost too expensive for us to use our own engine to develop a project like this. So Unity ends up being a better solution. And if you guys aren't familiar with what middleware is, it's things like if you don't want to spend like a legion of programmers' time and several $1 million to code your own physics engine, you go talk to Havoc, you license their program for doing physics, you bring it into your engine, and then you go from there. But those licensing costs end up being too expensive if you're running a Kickstarter, and Unity covers basically everything that we need. So we're in the middle of our vertical, not in the middle, we're reaching the end of our vertical slice for Eternity now, where we're fleshing out a lot of locations that we developed in the prototype. And the goal of a vertical slice is to show off a very small section of a much larger game. We want to make sure we have all the feature sets in terms of making sure all the art's being realized, that we start expanding out the locations from the initial prototypes. We start experimenting with what villages and towns are going to be laid out in the engine, how interiors work with day and night cycles, for example, how we start gray boxing out the dungeons, how we start making the art pass through those, the painterly effects, and trying to give them that custom touch the Infinity Engine games used to have. And we're also experimenting with how large we can make our exterior environments, what size and scope we can create for those that feel like Baldur's Gate and feel like the old exploration, the Infinity Engine games. We're also doing what we can to introduce a bunch of lore hooks in these areas. It's not just mechanics that we're doing. Although getting the tool set right for Eternity is very, very important to us. We don't want to leave Vertical Slice without having all the tools designers need to actually implement the content. And that sounds like common sense, but that's an important thing about it. That's an important goal of any Vertical Slice for a game, whether you're delivering it for a publisher or whether you're doing it internally. Things like making sure doors work properly. And this is a little crazy, but our CEO is very much about, if I don't see a door working in the game with all the properties a door should have, your engine is in trouble, especially for a role-playing game. Can you pick the locks on the door? Can you bash it open? Do triggers fire correctly? Do keys work on it? Can players move through that door? Do enemies move through that door? All those questions the door should answer. Also got to make sure you place encounters, traps, loot. We've been recreating the script library that was present in the Infinity Engine to make sure we have all the conditionals and action scripts ready for both dialogue, for setting up encounters properly, spell queues, things like that. And we've torn through a good chunk of the spells and abilities in the game. We've probably got about at least 50 of each implemented in an alpha state, which means they don't look terribly pretty, but they're in the game, they do the job, they're ready to get balanced. And we've done that for classes, for all the classes in the game through levels 1 through 5. And our project director, Josh Sawyer, and also one of our gameplay programmers, Tim Kane, who happened to work on a small game called Fallout 1, they're responsible for driving the systems design and getting this stuff implemented in the game and feeling tight and balanced. So they are to be commended for that. Doing due diligence for a Vertical Slice is very important because it allows you to determine how long it takes to create each of these feature sets, how long the levels take, how long it takes to build a weapon, how long it takes to make major characters, how long it takes to make minor characters and write their dialogue for those, because all of those serve as metrics for what scope of a game you can create within the time frame provided. And that's very, very important, especially for production, to get a sense for how large your game can actually be. In addition, before you ramp up into full production and you haul about 20 or 30, if not more, developers onto your project, you also want to make sure that not only are you doing the Vertical Slice that tests out all the pipelines for these things, but you also want to make sure that there are standards in place for building all of these things before you train new people to do it. You want to make sure the naming conventions are set up for files. You want to make sure that things like even like the narrative standards for how you write certain characters, how slang's being used, how races are referred to in the game, how certain cultures speak. All of those things need to be nailed down before you add more people to the team. So for example, I'm going to use an example from Wasteland 2 for the area design documents, mostly because our CEO says if you dare show a level design document for Eternity, I will make sure you have no home to go home to. So for Wasteland 2, there are some similarities between the quest the area design documentation, so I feel that's worth going through. We have a lot of categories that we make sure we're fleshing out in terms of reference art, the flow charts for how characters move through the level, how the maps fit together in the engine and how they're connected, where certain skills are being used at various points in the game, what sort of encounters you're setting up, what makes the combats for those counters more interesting for like flanking maneuvers or certain classes of characters. Those are things that you want to flesh out with your standards document and your area design documents. So if you do happen to try and go home and get murdered by your CEO, he will have that design doc that he can build a level based on without ever having to talk to you ever again. So another thing to do is we try and make sure that we're prioritizing almost all the elements that are being introduced in the game. And that's pretty important because there are certain features that are always A priority elements that absolutely must go into the game. C priority elements are kind of like, well, the player won't miss these if you don't include them. They may not even know that you could add that kind of feature, add that little tweak. But if there is time to do that, we would like to be able to add that feature into the engine. And this helps just about every department decide what's important to focus on at any point during the stage of the project. A priority stuff goes in first. C priority stuff may seem cool, but please leave that for the end after you've gone through the other elements of the development system. And speaking of systems, a lot of our prototypes, one of the questions that we often get from folks is, hey, we haven't seen a lot about the story. And even though there are lore and culture updates, a lot of the stuff that we've been seeing with regards to Eternity is focused on the systems. And there's a very, very good reason for that. It's important to have your character's movement set established before you ever start building levels or before you start developing content. You need to know how the character moves through the environment. You need to make sure that combat feels good. You need to make sure the character's walking speed feels correct. All of these things help dictate the design of your level and the design of the content for the game. The example that I use for this is actually Super Mario Brothers. From a moment-to-moment system experience, the act of Mario jumping has to be absolutely fun, and it also absolutely has to be nailed down. If you try and design 30 levels for a Super Mario Brothers game, and you don't know how high Mario can jump or how far he can jump, and you change that 1 month later, that is a lot of reworking of a lot of levels to make them match the system mechanic iteration that you're doing. So getting those systems down, getting them solid is very, very important for our studio. So lore elements. In addition to the system stuff and the area stuff I described, it's also important that the lore that we're doing for Eternity mesh with all these other elements in development. And while we don't want to give any spoilers for the actual story in the game, we want you to be able to experience that, there are certain elements about the process of how we're tackling this that I can share with you guys. Our studio starts with a basic narrative box for how we develop content for each of our games. So for example, Fallout New Vegas had a lot of the Fallout elements as part of that box. Hey, you know what? 1950s world. Here's how they imagine the science fiction, how they imagine the future. They dropped a nuclear warhead on it. A lot of RPG elements, allows for a lot of different character builds, reputation mechanics, different ways of solving quests, whether you're smart or sneaky or whatever. All of those things are part of the Fallout box for making the player feel special for having chosen that character build in the Fallout universe. And even Fallout 3 was part of the box for New Vegas in the sense of there must be an open world to explore. We should include a signature city present in the game. So when we have New Vegas present as the core of the New Vegas game, that was a conscious decision as part of sort of the narrative box that was included based on expectations for Fallout 3. We needed to make sure we had like a game that's comparable in scope, used the same engine, but felt a little bit different when players were playing through it. And Eternity itself has a box much like this. It's a lot of the pillars that I described before in terms of party-based dungeon exploration combat, a lot of cool dungeons to go through. But we also wanted to make sure we were maintaining the Baldur's Gate feel too. So like one of the backer cities that we have present in the game is a location called Defiance Bay. And this is the first concept art that we've shown for it. The intention is the player would travel to and come back to this location over the course of the game, see changes based on actions they've done in the environment, but it also is tied a lot into the history of what's going on in the Direwood area, which is sort of like one of the locations where the first installment of Eternity takes place. Defiance Bay is a series of walls and levees. They're designed to slowly expand outwards, reclaim certain sections of land to build more towns and homes out onto the peninsula. But it suffered a lot during the war when the Direwood was trying to break away from its parent nation, the Adir Empire. And when the levees broke, it flooded certain sections of the city. So people in Defiance Bay are slowly trying to reclaim those sections over time. And that's one of the major cities that we actually have present in the game. So without giving spoilers, more about the process. The actual writing of the story for Eternity has been somewhat different than we've done in our previous projects. Usually, it is the task of one person on the team, mostly because no one else has the time to actually invest in doing more contributions to the story. But with Eternity, we had a little bit more breathing room, and virtually all the designers that were on the project, we asked them, hey, you know what? Why don't each of you do a story treatment for Eternity? And given a certain box for like what races and cultures we have, how the layout of the world is, give us your take on what would be interesting, what would be an interesting story to develop with this particular world context. So we picked and chose 2 different drafts that we thought were really strong, and we asked the 2 writers to see about intertwining the elements. They came back with a 3rd draft that was actually pretty solid, incorporated a lot of the elements that we were looking for. And the only problem we had with the story brief procedure was that sometimes people would include far too much detail in the story brief, so much so it was actually hard to iterate on them, provide feedback, and review those things, and find out what the core elements that needed to change about them were. Because a story brief should be just that. Like, you don't want to include so many details in a summary that it's hard to see what the player's core actions through the game actually are. So we went back to some of the presentations, some of the story pitches, and we're like, you know what? Just be focused, keep it solely on one page, make sure that I understand clearly what the stage is being set. If we need to add more layers later, that's great. But I don't want you guys to get too attached to certain specific details that are present in your story brief. Always leave room for iteration, a little bit freedom for how you might want to revise some of these elements, because reading through a 10-page brief isn't really a story brief at all. And it's much easier on me to review, for example, so it's a little bit of a selfish request. The important thing is that these story briefs are hitting the right beats for Project Eternity, and there's a few steps that we go through to make sure that's being done. We want to make sure that the story has a really good hook. For example, with Torment, way back in the day, it was immortal amnesiac tries to figure out how he got to this state and discovers that someone is trying to prevent him from finding out that answer. That is basically the hook of Torment. However, one other thing we try and make sure we do in our story briefs is we're also making sure that we're including the player perspective on these events too. It's also important to summarize the state of the world in a way that players can easily understand. And Fallout was always really, really good about this with the opening movies. Like in New Vegas, Courier enters the Mojave Wasteland, which is currently being contested by Caesar's Legion and NCR, who are fighting over Hoover Dam. That is the stage that you are setting for the player, and then they're off to explore after that. And the game is about much more than that, but it's important that the player easily be able to get a sense for what the major conflicts are in the game and what situation he's going into when the game begins. So some of the world elements that we're developing, like I mentioned before, we're trying to do much like an Infinity Engine style game in terms of how we lay out the world and interesting locations you can go to. But one freedom that we have that we didn't have with the Infinity Engine games was a sense of conflict that we can add to the world. When doing the Infinity Engine games, we were dealing with a lot of D&D campaign worlds, and that's being shared by a number of different products, from novels to adventure books to source books, and even homebrewed pen and paper games. And keeping that world consistent is very, very important for the developers of Dungeons & Dragons. So there's not too much you can do to actually mess up that world, because you need to sort of return it to its natural state once you're done. And the nice thing about Eternity is we absolutely don't have to do that. So it's great, and it's allowed us a sense of freedom to make sure the player can leave their mark on the world, both during the game and when the game concludes. And that's important to us because one of the things we try and do in our projects is we try and make sure that there's a lot of player agency in terms of your actions matter. You need to see that they matter. You need to see the repercussions. You need to see the echoes that travel out from your actions. Because if you can't leave your mark on the world, it sort of makes an emptier RPG experience. And we want to make sure that every character by the end of the game has a different track that they've followed and a different way that they've developed compared to some other character that went through Eternity, and the two of them can compare their experiences. And I think a lot of games, RPGs that I've enjoyed in the past, have had significant story moments that allowed the player to leave their mark on the world and left me with something after the game was over that, oh my God, that certain story element they did in the game, fantastic. I'm still talking about it with my friends. I'm still chewing it over in my mind. Final Fantasy III is one of my favorites. It certainly did a very brave narrative decision halfway through the game that I still uphold as one of the best things to do to a world in possibly RPG history. And I think a lot of the recent titles that have come out have also been really narratively brave about how they approach certain subjects with a narrative. And I'm really been impressed by that. And we want to make sure that Eternity upholds that narrative tradition and tries to push it forward where it can. But we just don't want to do that with a narrative. We also do that with the dungeons as well. We want to make sure that dungeons react and change events within them depending on the player's actions. That's very, very important to us. And we also make sure the player character's abilities over the course of the game are also being changed as well, and in significant ways that go outside of just their class or their race. These are things that you choose that will actually allow you to develop more as a character. So I want to give you a screenshot of our vertical slice dungeon. It encapsulates a lot of the things that we're trying to do with Project Eternity. First off, we wanted to make sure we're including the sort of epic scope of some of the old Infinity Engine dungeons in terms of we want a lot of areas within it that are showing a lot of different variety. We wanted to create a very painterly feel to some of these rooms and locations. So a lot of the areas in this dungeon, the artists go through, they add their little custom touches. And this is not tiled at all. This was all custom built by our environment artists to sort of realize this vision. Also, we wanted to play around with the idea that we don't have to make our dungeons all right angles anymore. Because we don't have to deal with a tiled tool set, what we can do is we can actually sculpt out the dungeons so they're asymmetrical, play around with caverns more, and actually create a much more natural feel because we're not actually laying it out with a tile-based system. This particular location is, like I said, it's being used for the vertical slice. It's actually a temple that's being inhabited by vengeful cultists because sometimes cultists get really vengeful. And in this dungeon, they especially do as well. So it's just one of the sample locations that we have set up. We also try and make sure that as part of our narrative box, we're also taking the bestiary into account and making sure that as much of the lore and culture of the world is being reflected in the monsters that we're showcasing for the player. One issue that we had with the D&D games is most of the monsters that we had were mostly a grab bag collection of random monsters that would be spread across many campaign worlds in Dungeons & Dragons. So when you're trying to populate a certain dungeon in an Infinity Engine game, you don't always feel like that creature necessarily belongs there as much as it could. So we're trying to correct that for Eternity, and that's one of our target goals for the bestiary. So for an example, we have this creature called an animat in Eternity. And what it is it harnesses a lot of our soul magic mechanics that we have present in the game. And these creatures are actually born from warrior spirits that are extracted from a poor brave warrior, infused into a suit of bronze armor, and then they can become defenders and guardians of certain locations. Some of the older cultures in Eternity learned ways to use certain metals and realized that some of them act as sort of better binders for soul energy than others. And as the player adventures over the course of the game, they'll discover a lot of the ancient culture's secrets with regards to this soul transference magic. We do a lot of concepting work to try and get a feel for how these creatures might work. Josh and Bobby Null, our area designer, and who's also in charge of the bestiary, they are very considerate about presenting a broad picture to our concept artists and then letting them figure out what's the best look, what's the best color, what's the best format, what's the best inlays and designs for an armor of this type that would look really cool for this creature, and then letting them run with it. And we do want to make sure we're creating locations that actually complement these creatures as well. So this particular dungeon that we have set up here is actually sort of an animat creating factory. And it's basically based on, it was built by one of the ancient cultures in the game, and who basically set up this entire area for the purpose of creating these animats as defenders and guardians. So when we actually have the creatures in the location, players get to see how these creatures were created, be able to see the process for how it happened, and see sort of like traces of the ancient culture's methodology in terms of approaching this. And that brings me to one other issue that we've had with a narrative box. Generally, every fantasy world has a different magic system about it. And depending on what that magic system is, that can drastically change everything about your narrative, about your cultures, about your race's place in the world. If you've ever read things like Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn or Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind, the magic systems they introduce in those games and those books cause all sorts of repercussions throughout the world they've created. And in Eternity, the soul transference mechanic, the idea that people take power and spell effects and abilities from the strength of their own souls and souls of others around them, that has caused a huge impact in terms of how we change cultures and how we basically deal with politics and history in the game. So one of our challenges is how to introduce that system to the player, both mechanically and from a narrative standpoint, but yet put the player in a situation where they're in a unique perspective to observe how that's being transferred in the world and then sort of make their own commentary on it. And that's really important to us as a studio. It's also a very party-based game. We needed to make sure that we needed to explain why there are so many parties and adventuring mercenary companies in the world of Eternity, why there are so many adventurer halls and guild halls as opposed to like standing armies and huge masses of forces moving through the region. And we also want to make sure we're taking a lot of good care with factions, because one thing we've noticed with factions is you have to be really careful about how they're being presented to the player. Anytime you have a certain lore element or a certain organization in the world, if you have a certain lore book explaining that organization, you want to make sure that the player has some sort of agency in dealing with that organization, whether they can either get certain quests from it, get certain abilities, or hopefully, if at all possible, like become the masters of that faction. You need to explain to the player and show the player and let them interact with those organizations, the environment, in a way that increases their own power and, for want of a better word, in a very selfish way for the player. So we've got our themes nailed down. We've got our basic spine for the story set up. We feel really good about the player agency that we have at Eternity. It's gone through about its third iteration right now, and it's looking pretty tight. One thing about our process is with Eternity, we're trying to make sure that we leave our companions off to the side, and we're going to wait on writing them and developing them until we have the story absolutely nailed down. And the reason for that is much like our approach to systems. We really enjoyed writing a lot of the companions for New Vegas, and I think that they were very strong companions. But you get more strength out of people that are journeying in your party if they're able to comment on the theme of the adventure, if they're able to comment on what's going on, if they're intimately tied to quests and events that are part of the critical path, they become more of an asset for telling the story. And we discovered that when we were doing Mask of the Betrayer, that the companions in your party were actually a powerful tool for foreshadowing, questioning certain themes, and acting as sounding boards for the player if they weren't sure how they stood on a particular issue or how they stood with a particular faction or our political take. That's sort of the broad strokes of how we're approaching the narrative in Eternity. We've also had a lot of forum feedback in terms of how to approach the world of development as well, and being able to share with the community has been really, really great for us. Sometimes the reaction has been a little bit passionate, but it's all come from a good place and has allowed us to iterate. And I gotta say again, I would much rather have players supporting our gaming efforts than dealing with publishers with regards to games like Eternity, because I feel that the players especially understand what type of game we're trying to make and what sort of systems are important for making a game like that successful. A lot of the sharing stuff I've been kind of scared about. The first scary experience I had with Kickstarter was actually sharing the Wasteland 2 vision document way back with In Exile. This is something that we've never been allowed to do with a publisher, where you sort of put it all out there and go, here are the things that we absolutely feel are important for this game. What do you guys think about it? And the reaction was very, very positive. I think the biggest critique we had was, these all sound very good, and I certainly hope that you can reach them as a goal because they sound really cool to us. But once we shared that, and that was the feedback that came back, I started getting progressively less scared about sharing stuff with the community. It came to mind that people just like seeing stuff get built. They like seeing gray boxes of stuff. They do like seeing works in progress because many of them are developers themselves, or they're interested in how that whole process comes together to create a game. And that's been a really liberating part of Kickstarter. And the ability to share a vision with the rest of the world, that in itself, from a developer standpoint, is also really liberating. So I'm going to go through some of this a little bit fast. We also have a lot of internal discussions in the studio in terms of forming consensus, but one other thing that we do is we also make sure that we share as much as we can across departments. And we do that through our amazing blog system. Like every Thursday, Josh will put together a picture that symbolizes, hey, it's time for you guys to blog. And then every department puts up samples of stuff they've been working on throughout the week, things like armor sets they might be working on. And it's just a reminder, it's something that the whole company can see, not just the people that are working on Eternity. So if somebody's on South Park or if they're on our third project and they happen to want to scan the blogs to sort of free up their mind, they can actually check out anything that's going on at Eternity that's posted up there and find out what's being developed. And there's usually a lot of cool stuff that, the modelers might be working on in terms of how the characters are built, what sort of heads are being constructed. And I have to confess, I think Josh and Rob have a lot of fun just setting up the different blog images they send out to remind people to share with the rest of the company, even if they might get a little out of control every once in a while. So that's good. Two really quick things about the future, and then I'm going to try and hop onto this Dell and see if I can show you some of the art elements in our latest build. There are two elements about the future that make me really happy about Kickstarter, and the future isn't as bleak as we point out, as we sort of paint in some of our games. There's two elements about the Kickstarter process that I really, really enjoy. One that came to mind was the process that Wasteland 2 used with sharing Unity assets with the community. What they did was they recognized, hey, we have a series of concepts for basic props and materials we'd like to see in our environments. Here's a color style guide. Here's some requirements for how we'd like to see these props made. And we will put these requests out for the community. So if you guys want to build props for Wasteland 2, construct some assets, pass them by NXile, you'll get paid for their work. You get a little tag that says, hey, this asset was used in Wasteland 2. NXile gets happy because they have a lot of props to build, everything from rocks to desks. And if you ever played New Vegas, there's a lot of rocks and a lot of cars. So this is a way for a larger community to contribute to a project, help expand their portfolio, expand their resume, and a developer gets the added benefit that they have a series of contractors they can draw on to go, hey, you know what? We need to prop out our environments. Why don't we get help from the community? And speaking as somebody who gets anywhere from 20 to 50 resumes for intern or junior positions at our company that we absolutely can't fill, seeing this kind of process for people getting game experience and getting their name out there is absolutely fantastic. And it's been really, caused me a brief burst of optimism, which is very, very rare. The second element is these Kickstarters for RPGs have been really successful. They have garnered more backer support and more funding than they had thought, much more than they had thought. And we have noticed that publishers have paid attention to that, and they are aware of the success that these projects have had. So we have actually had companies that reach out to us and go, you know what? For that price point, which is a much less risk than some of our huge AAA titles where there's much more at stake. That's much less risk for us, and we wouldn't mind exploring the idea of doing old school RPGs that are set up more like this, which totally floors me. I did not realize there would be that sort of sea change from publishers, but apparently there are a number of publishers that realize doing an Eternity-style game is a good fit for them, and I am thankful for that. What exactly does that mean for the future? I don't know. But I do know that NXile is enjoying a lot of success with having both Wasteland 2 and Torment running in tandem. And that reminds me sort of the old Black Isle days where we had a number of RPG projects going on at once. And the thought that studios can go back to that model sort of gives me hope that maybe we can see that resurgence of the Infinity Engine era, but with the Unity engine, Eternity and Wasteland-style games. Seeing a revolution like that occur would make me very, very happy. And the thought we could go back to doing hardcore role-playing games on the PC, and that's our target market, and we can make that successful, that makes me incredibly happy. So in terms of how that all develop, we'll see, but I'm very optimistic about that as well. And this is my reminder to make sure that I play the demo.
also, can we do a Q&A at 6 p.m. in the bar?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Do you want to announce that?
We'll get the demo up and running in a second, and just to say we won't have time for questions afterwards, but we will relocate to the bar at 6 p.m. and do an impromptu Q&A there. So if you join us in the Wetherspoons just over there, we'll also do some questions there, so hopefully that'll be fun. And let's get the demo up and running.
Okay, let's do a changeover.
Okay. What? Oh, thank you.
All right, sounds good.
Can you make some sounds?
Yes, I can.
The I1.
There should be music playing, I believe.
All right, so this is on. Can you guys hear me all right? All right, sweet. And by the way, I swear to God, like when you guys catch me in the bar, you will have the added benefit that I will be drunk and answering questions. So feel free to ask whatever you want. Don't be shy. And anyway, so here's a lot of the stuff that we're developing for our art and tech demo for our prototypes, and I want to share some of that stuff with you now. Ultimately, some of the things we've been doing with the engine, hold on one moment. Bam. All right, fantastic. So one thing that we had an issue with the Infinity Engine games is we didn't want to go back solely to doing a very static painted environment. What we wanted to make sure was there was a lot of activity and energy present in the location. So things like being able to see the trees sway in the breeze, things like we want to get the waterfalls more life, we want to be able to see movement in the rivers. All of those things were important for creating life for these environments and not just static paintings that you walk over. These are more lively, animated paintings. So, but not only that, we also wanted to make sure we could play around with certain environment effects as well. So we want to like raise and lower the water in certain environments, we can do that. And some of the designers had some really cool ideas for dungeons based around these effects. So we're really pretty excited about seeing that in the engine. We've been working a lot on making sure we have all the character models and animation sets focused and good to go. A lot of effort has been spent on making sure that we get the walk cycles correct, we get the characters' movement speeds correct, they're moving great through the environment, and also making sure that their armor sets, their weapon sets, and how you outfit the character is also being realized. In addition to the basic animations of the environment, we also wanted to make sure that we were capturing the feel of a world that, of course, has showing time passing. So things like having the basic day-night cycle implemented in the engine was very, very important to us. Even though this entire environment is built in 2D, like it's a totally 2D environment, we wanted to make sure that we could show the passing of the night-day cycle and have things like schedules built around that, and even have like dynamic lights present in the environment as well. So when people are carrying around torches, firing off spells, you'll actually see the environment light up as you adventure through it. So those are a few of the core visual elements that we wanted to make sure we proved out with our tech. And we should have more stuff to share along those lines once we reach the end of our vertical slice. Our goal with that is much like Shadowrun Returns and Wasteland 2, it is our goal to show sort of a gameplay movie that showcases how all these things are playing out in the vertical slice. And anyway, so that's a brief example of the build, and I absolutely guarantee that if you show up at the location that was described, I will answer whatever questions you have, provided they don't get me into too much trouble. So please, thank you all very much for your patience. I really, really appreciate it. You guys are wonderful. And if you were one of the backers for Eternity, thank you very much for that as well. It was a huge morale boost to our studio, and we were very, very thankful.
So yeah, thank you very, very much for coming. Thanks for your patience. And we do have Sir You Are Being Hunted coming in a second. So if you want to pop in and come back in, we'll be doing that. And also hopefully see you in the bar at 6 p.m. So, ta-ra.